Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis. Boy, we're really getting to the end of Chelik Gimel, an unbelievable accomplishment, Rabbi Isai. Thank you for all of those who are out there listening to the share. This is just an unbelievable accomplishment to go through the entire Chelik Gimel together. Wow. Okay, so we're going to say share today on Daf Kuf Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis. We pick up today on the bottom line of Kuf Tzadik Gimel Amid Aleph with a new Siman Shin Mem Beis, Bein Hashmashos Mutar La'asos Dvarim Sha'asru Chazal Mishum Gezerah. During the Bein Hashmashos period, Friday evening going into Shabbos, you're allowed to perform activities that normally would be Asur Midrabanan on Shabbos because of a Gezerah in Hilcha Shabbos, Ubay Sif Echad, and in this Siman we are going to have one Sif. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzara, Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam, Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yetziim Mitzara L'Rvacha, Me'afela La'ira, Umishibud L'Geula, Hashta Bagala of Zman Kariv and Emar Main. Our learning should be a schus for Fuh Shalema from Shemer ben Esther Fradel, Yitzhak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rivka Bashir Leah, Chava Hadassah Baserel, Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, and Gila Shifra Bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Soich Shar Chole Yisrael. Okay, so let's start. Siman Shin Mem Beis says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Kol Hadvarim Shehem Asurim Midivrei Soifrim. Anything that is typically Asur on Shabbos because of a Din D'Rabbanan. Now, we're not talking here about all Yisurei D'Rabbanan. We're talking about things that are Asur Midrabbanan on Shabbos. Kol Hadvarim Shehem Asurim Midivrei Soifrim. Things that are Asur to do on Shabbos because of a Din D'Rabbanan. Like Gazra Alehem Bein Hashmashos. The Chazal did not apply their Isur D'Rabbanan during the Bein Hashmashos period going into Shabbos. As far as the Bein Hashmashos period exiting Shabbos evening going into Motzei Shabbos, we'll discuss the status of that Bein Hashmashos period in the Mishnah Berurah. Right now, the Mechaber tells us Isurei D'Rabbanan on Shabbos are not in effect during the Bein Hashmashos period going into Shabbos, and the Mechaber used the word over here, Kol Hadvarim, everything that's Asur Midrabbanan, and right away the Mishnah Berurah is going to pounce on that. Let's go down to the Mishnah Berurah here. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Katan Aleph. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kol Hadvarim, Lishna de Kol Lav Dafka. This Kol is not really precise. The Yesh Dvarim She'Isurei Midivrei Soifrim, there are Isurei D'Rabbanan, V'Gazra Alein Ben Hashmashos, and yet they are Asur during the Bein Hashmashos period, Af L'Tzarech Mitzvah, even if you want to transgress that Isur D'Rabbanan L'Tzarech Mitzvah. Now, I should say, I paused in the Mechaber where I paused there for a reason, but I left out part of the halacha. When the Mechaber says over here that Isurei D'Rabbanan of Shabbos are not in effect during Bein Hashmashos, that is not a blanket heter. If you turn the page to Kuf Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis, the Mechaber says right away, V'hu sheyehei sham dvar mitzvah oidoichik. The only time that's true, when do we have this kula that Isurei D'Rabbanan of Shabbos are not in effect during the Bein Hashmashos period? That's where you have a pressing need or a tzarech mitzvah to do something that would ordinarily be an Isur D'Rabbanan. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim over here in Eis Katan Aleph, this Kol Hadvarim is still imprecise, because there are certain things that would ordinarily be Isurei D'Rabbanan, and they are Asur during the Bein Hashmashos period, even B'Shas Adchak, and even L'Tzarech Mitzvah. They're still Asur. Kigoin, for example, says the Chavetz Chaim, Hamavur L'Kaman B'Siman Taftes Sif Gimel B'Shulchan Aruch. We're going to see an example of that, Mirz Hashem, not all that long from now, in Chelik Dalid, when we're learning Hilchas Erevin. We will see an example of that. We're going to see over there a halacha that if somebody set up an Eruvei Tchumen, and we're going to go into a more detailed discussion of Eruvei Tchumen and how it affects the Siman that we're learning right now shortly, but right now suffice it to say, if somebody set up an Eruvei Tchumen before Shabbos, and he took his Erev. What's the Erev? It's Mazain Shtei Seudais, an amount of food that could be used for 2 Seudais. That's what the Erev is made out of. If somebody took his Eruvei Trumin and he set it up, 2,000 amos away, and he put it on top, he tied it, let's say, to the top of a reed, a koneh, something that's not very strong, that Erev is not going to work. Why is that Erev not going to work? Because we're going to see one of the requirements of Eruvei Tchumen is that the Eruvei Tchumen has to be something that is accessible theoretically. You don't have to be there, but it has to be something that would be theoretically accessible to you during the Ben Hashmashas period. Now, if you take your Erev and you put it on top of a reed that is delicate, that could break very easily, then that Erev is not going to be in effect. Why? Because, let's do the math. To take your Erev off of a reed that's growing from the ground is being mishtamish b'mechuber, right? It's the Yisod Rabbanan that we had, that you're not allowed to be mishtamish b'ilon, right? So this would be mishtamish b'mechuber, because you're taking your Erev off of the reed. That's like taking something off a tree on Shabbos, right? As it is a Rabbanan. Now, we're going to see that the Yisod Rabbanan of taking something off a tree is not in effect during the Ben Hashmashas period if it's being in the context of Hilchas Erevin. But if you didn't put the Erev on a tree, if you put the Erev on a rather delicate reed, on a koneh, if you put the Erev on top of a delicate koneh, then the Erev is not going to take effect. Why? It's still only an Yisod Rabbanan to take the Erev off of this koneh that is b'mechuber, but that's an Yisod Rabbanan that the Chazal put in effect even during Ben Hashmashas, even when it's the tzarich mitzvah, because you need to be able to access your Eruvei Tchumen, which ostensibly you set up l'tzarich mitzvah. Still, the Yisod Rabbanan is going to be in effect. Why? Because since it's a delicate reed, we're afraid that you're going to break the reed. Breaking the reed, you could already be coming to Isurei Daraisa of Toilish. So since it's so easy to come to an Issa Daraisa, that Issa Drabanan remains in effect even during the Ben Hashmashas period, even l'tzarich mitzvah. V'chein, similarly, continues the Chavetz Chaim, lahavir pachas me arba amos. We know that there's an Issa Daraisa of Haitzah. You're not allowed to transport an item a distance of 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah. That would be an Issa Daraisa. But what if you want to transport something a long distance in Rosh Hashanah and you're going to avoid transporting it 4 amos at a time? What are you going to do? You're going to transport it pachus, me'arba amos. You're going to pick it up, you're going to go 3.5 amos, and then you're going to put it down. Were you over in Issa Daraisa now? No. You only transported the item 3.5 amos. Then you're going to pick it up again, go another 3.5 amos, put it down. Again, no Issa Daraisa. The truth is, by doing this, you could transport something in Rosh Hashanah a vast distance and never be over in Issa Daraisa of Haitzah, because at no time did you pick it up and transport it 4 amos in one shot. But this is Aser Midrabanan. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to transport something pachus me'arba amos in Rosh Hashanah. Now, to be clear, you are allowed to pick up something in Rosh Hashanah, even Midrabanan. You're allowed to take something in Rosh Hashanah, move it 3.5 amos and put it down. What you're not allowed to do is go more than 4 amos by doing pachus me'arba amos. So, even with Rabbanan, you're allowed to pick up something in Rosh Hashanah, go 3 amos and put it down. You weren't over in Issa Rabbanan at that point. But should you pick it up again and go another amma and a half, so you went over the 4 amma limit, even though you did it pachus, that is an Issa Rabbanan. Now that's an Issa Rabbanan that we're going to learn is in effect during Ben Hashmashas, even l'tzarich mitzvah. Why? Because again, that's an Issa Rabbanan that was put in place to protect you against very easily coming to be over in Issa Daraisa. If we're going to allow you to do pachus me'arba amos in Rosh Hashanah, it's very easy to see that somebody's going to forget to put the item down in the middle and he's going to go more than 4 amos. So because these are Isurei D'Rabbanan, which if we allow you to violate them, you're coming really dangerously close to being over on Isurei D'Oraisa, These Isurei D'Rabbanan remain in place even during the Ben Hashmashas period, even when it's in the context of Tzarchei Mitzvah. And the Mishnah Berurah spells out what I just said. Vatam, the reason why these Isurei D'Rabbanan would remain in effect even during the Ben Hashmashas period, Mishum Dehem Kroivim Lavai Lidei Malacha Gemura Daraisa Gazru Behem Tvei. Since it's very easy to come to Isurei Daraisa by violating these Isurei D'Rabbanan, the Chazal were much more machmir by these Isurei D'Rabbanan, and they're even also during the Ben Hashmashas period. V'chein, similarly, Harbi Paiskim Soivrim De'ein Ma'arvin Iruvi Tchumin Ben Hashmashas Avshu L'Tzarech Mitzvah. Many Paiskim say that you're not allowed to establish an Iruvi Tchumin during the Ben Hashmashas period. Why would that be? Well, the answer to that is interesting, because the creation of Iruvi Tchumin has a certain aspect of tikkun to it. You're kind of fixing something. You're fixing a situation. Like this, you have a prohibition, you have an isser that says that you could only travel 2,000 amas away from your Mokken Shvisa, right? By making it a Ruvei Tchumin, that isser goes away, and now you could travel another 2,000 amas. So you made it tikkun. You fixed something, right? You fixed something for yourself. You fixed up a situation. And therefore, that is something that some poskim say is usher during the Ben Hashmashas period. Why were they so machmer? Well, one of the reasons they were so machmer, we have this whole machlokes, whether Iruvei Tchumin are a deraisa, whether Iruvei Tchumin are derabanan. But even if you hold Iruvei Tchumin are derabanan, it's based on a pasuk. It's like an asmachta. It is based on a pasuk, so it's considered a very stringent Issa D'Rabbanan, and some poskim hold that it remains in place even during the Ben Hashmashas period. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Another example. V'chein malacha shein tzarek legufa chamu mishar Issa D'Rabbanan v'asa b'chol gavdi Ben Hashmashas. Anytime you do something that we say is a malacha shein tzricha legufa, so we know that we paskin like Reb Shimon. We paskin that a malacha shein tzricha legufa is only an Issa D'Rabbanan. According to the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda that even a malacha shein tzricha legufa is in a daraisa. But we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, generally speaking, that once something can be looked at as being a malacha shein tzricha legufa, it's only in issa d'Rabbanan. Says the Chavetz Chaim, anything that is lessened to being a d'Rabbanan because it's a malacha shein tzricha legufa, that is something that would still be usher during Ben Hashmashas. Why? Why are we so machmer in this case? Because the truth is, by a malacha she'en tzricha legufa, the action that you are performing is exactly identical to the Issa D'Oraisa. So again, we've spoken about this many times. The classic example of malacha she'en tzricha legufa. There's a mace, there's a niftar that's in a house. There are people living in the house. They can't live in the house together with the niftar in the house. So you want to remove the niftar from the house. Remove the niftar from the house, you're doing haitzah. You're taking the niftar from the house, the Rishus HaYachid, you want to take him out into the Rishus HaRabim, that would be mamish and issa daraisa. Oh, but it's a malacha she'en tzricha legufa. Why is it a malacha she'en tzricha legufa? Because the ikar purpose of haitzah is when something is in the house and you need it in Rishus HaRabim. So you want to transport it from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim in order to have it in the Rishus HaRabim. That's haitzah of a malacha she'tzricha legufa. In the case of the mace, you don't want the mace in Rishus HaRabim. You just want the mace out of the Rishus HaYachid. But that's not really the main purpose of haitzah. Therefore, this is haitzah that's only a derabanan. Why? Because it's a malacha she'en tzricha legufa. But the action is exactly the same as the Issa D'Oraisa. Right? You're picking up something in Rishus HaYachid, you're taking it out to Rishus HaRabim and putting it down in Rishus HaRabim. That is exactly the action of the Issa D'Oraisa. Just in this case, it happens to be a malacha she'en tzricha legufa. But since it's exactly identical to the Issa D'Oraisa, Chazal were more machmir, and we say that anything that's a d'Rabbanan only because it's a malacha she'en tzricha legufa remains usher during the Ben Hashmashas period. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Afim Nema de Etzem Yisuri Hu Derabanan. Even if you pasca like Reb Shimon, the Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufas is Derabanan. The Cholshkein Dalar Rambam Hu Daraisa. Remember, according to the Rambam, Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufas is not a Derabanan. It's a Daraisa. Okay, so what do we have here so far? It gets very confusing very quickly. Mechaber told us a halacha. We know that we have a lot of Yisurei Derabanan on Shabbos. We know that the Ben Hashmoshes period, and we'll discuss exactly the parameters of when Ben Hashmoshes is, but we know that the Ben Hashmoshes period is a suffix period. The Ben Hashmoshes, the twilight period going into Shabbos, is suffix Yom, suffix Laila. So if we're in a period during Ben Hashmoshes where it's not for certain Shabbos, it's a suffix Yom, suffix Laila. Now you want to do something that's only in Issa D'Rabbanan. Well, it's a suffix D'Rabbanan, really. Suffix D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So really, to do something that's in Issa D'Rabbanan during the Ben Hashmoshes period, says the Mechaber, we could be Mekel. You could do an Issa D'Rabbanan during the Ben Hashmoshes period. When? If it's a Shasat Chak, if there's a pressing need, there's something that you need to do. It's not just that, it's still Ben Hashmoshes, Isirei D'Rabbanan didn't activate yet, Isirei D'Rabbanan don't apply yet. No, Isirei D'Rabbanan do apply. But there's a Kula, B'Shasat Chak, or L'Tzarech Mitzvah, we could be Mekel, and you could do Isirei D'Rabbanan during the Ben Hashmoshes period. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, there are some carve-outs. It depends on the Issa D'Rabbanan. If it's an Issa D'Rabbanan like Pakas Me'aba Amais Perushos Arabim, that's dangerously close to an Issa D'Oraisa. No, that is in effect during Ben Hashmoshes. Making an Eruvei Trumin, according to some, nope, you're not allowed to do it, even during Ben Hashmoshes. Putting your Erev on top of a reed where it's very easy, you might come to break a reed, come to an Issa D'Oraisa of Toilish. Nope, that's in effect during Ben Hashmoshes. Belacha Shein Tzricha Legufa, it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan, doesn't matter. It's still also during Ben Hashmoshes. Why? Because the action is the same as a D'Oraisa. Now the Mishnah Berurah makes another very important point. V'da, and you should know. The Kol Sif Zeh, this entire Sif, the Kula that we're learning about here, Loi Mayrik Yishakibel Alav Shabbos. If you were already Makabel Shabbos during the Ben Hashmoshes period, then it's Shabbos Gomer for you. Avalim Kibel Alav Shabbos. If you were already Makabel Shabbos, Kigoin, for example, Al Yidei Mizmar Shir Yom Shabbos. You went to shul to daven Kabbalah Shabbos. You already said Mizmar Shir. Or nowadays, when we say L'chadoidi, when you get to the last stanza of L'chadoidi, and you say Boi v'shalom ateres balag amberinu v'tzahala, Boi kala, that's bringing in Shabbos. So you were already Makabel Shabbos. Mavur le'el b'siman Reish Samach Aleph. Then we already learned in Reish Samach Aleph. Sha'afilu hu mi ba'id yoim. Even if it's not Ben Hashmoshes, even if it's still day, it's before Shkia. It's Vada Yoim. But if you are Makabel Shabbos, va'afilu im rakat tzibur kiblu alav, or you live in a place where everybody in the tzibur was already Makabel Shabbos, even Miba'id Yom, Chalol of Shabbos Bal Karkai. Now it's Shabbos for you completely. Also, loy lasis kol shvus ba'atzmai afilu l'dvar mitzvah im loy al yidei ovid gelulim. Then certainly you can't do an Issa D'Rabbanan. Amir La'akum, to do something al yidei Amir La'akum is a different story. But you can't do an Issa D'Rabbanan even during the Ben Hashmoshes period, because for you it's already Shabbos Gomer. Okay, ice cotton base, Ben Hashmoshes. So we're talking about this twilight period, Ben Hashmoshes, and we're giving a very big kula here. We're saying that you're allowed to perform Isurei D'Rabbanan if it's a Shasat Chak, if it's a Tzarech Mitzvah. Obviously, we need to know when is this time period. When does this time period start? When does this time period end? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mavur le'el b'siman Reish Samach Aleph Sif Beis Ayin Sham. Mishnah Berurah says, nope, I'm not telling you the answer now, because we already discussed it in great detail in a lengthy Mishnah Berurah, in the Mechaber, in a very lengthy Bir Halacha. We already discussed it already in Reish Samach Aleph, so we don't got to talk about it again, says the Chavetz Chaim. So just a quick reminder. The famous Machlokes, the Gra and the Rabbeinu Tam. According to the Gra, Ben Hashmoshes begins at what we call Shkia, sunset. Sunset marks the beginning of Ben Hashmoshes according to the Gra. When does Ben Hashmoshes end according to the Gra? 13 and a half minutes after Shkia. That's when Ben Hashmoshes ends, and that's Vadai Laila. So according to the Gra, This time period is very, very short, this Ben Hashmash's time period. Begins with Shkia, ends 13 and a half minutes later. And to make it even more chamor, it could be, according to Rav Moshe's calculations, that in the New York metropolitan area, latitude and longitude, it could be that according to the Gra, Ben Hashmashos again begins at Shkia, but it doesn't end 13 and a half minutes after Shkia. It ends more like 9 minutes after Shkia. So the time period of Ben Hashmashos, according to the Gra, very, very short. That's one end of the spectrum. Then we have Rabbeinu Tam. According to Rabbeinu Tam, Shkia does not even mark the beginning of Ben Hashmashos. What we call Shkia, the Rabbeinu Tam calls Tchila Shkia, the beginning of Shkia. Then Rabbeinu Tam has a second Shkia, Soif Shkia. What's Soif Shkia? According to the Rabbeinu Tam, Soif Shkia is 58 and a half minutes after what we call Shkia. 58 and a half minutes after what we call Shkia is what Rabbeinu Tam calls Soif Shkia. That would mark the beginning of Ben Hashmashos. Ben Hashmashos would end 13 and a half minutes later, which is 72 minutes after Shkia. That would be the end of Ben Hashmashos. So you have on one end, you have the Gra. Ben Hashmashos begins at Shkia, ends somewhere between 9 and 13 and a half minutes later. On the other hand, we have Rabbeinu Tam, on the other extreme, that Ben Hashmashos begins 58 and a half minutes after Shkia, and it runs for 13 and a half minutes. Or, again, according to Rav Moshe's calculations, in the New York metropolitan area, it could be that Soif Shkia, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, is anywhere from 40 to 50 minutes after Shkia, and it ends anywhere from 7 to 13 and a half minutes later. So you have a very big swing over here. Halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa, Rav Moshe seems to write in the Tshuva that halacha l'maisa b'negea to this, the way we look at it is as follows. We know that according to Rabbeinu Tam, from Shkia until something like 40 minutes after Shkia is Vadayoim. So yeah, we have the Gra that says that once we hit Shkia, we're in a suffix. According to Rabbeinu Tam, that time period is Vadayoim. Says Rav Moshe, why are Chazal mekel during Ben Hashmashos? The reason they're mekel during Ben Hashmashos is because it's a suffix. What is the suffix? It's a suffix in Metzius. It's a suffix in astronomy. It's a suffix in what the physical reality is. We don't know if this is day or if this is night. That's a suffix in Metzius. Well, says Rav Moshe, Chazal were mekel because of a suffix in Metzius. We have a suffix in din. We don't know. We have the Gra, we have the Rabbeinu Tam. We have a suffix in din. Says Rav Moshe, the same way Chazal said we could be mekel because of a suffix in Metzius, we could also be mekel in a suffix in din. Therefore, says Rav Moshe, as long as there's a time period where, according to Rabbeinu Tam, it's Vadayoim, we could treat that as at least like Ben Hashmashos. We won't do Isiri Daraisa, but we'll treat it like Ben Hashmashos, and we can apply this kula of Ben Hashmashos. Once we reach a point, once we reach Rabbeinu Tam's Soif Shkia, so now we're hitting the time where Rabbeinu Tam says that Ben Hashmashos already began. So now, according to Rabbeinu Tam, that time period is Safek Yom, Safek Laila. Well, then, during that time period, we have a double suffix that it might really be Shabbos. According to the Gra, it's Vadei Laila. According to Rabbeinu Tam, it's Safek Laila. So at that point, we already have to be Machmir. Hayoytze midvarenu is that we, according to Rav Moshe, we could apply this kula of Ben Hashmashos, that b'shas chak or l'tzarich mitzvah, you could do Isiri D'Rabbanan during the Ben Hashmashos period. We could apply that from Shkia until somewhere between 33 and 40 minutes after Shkia. I would say be on the safe side, 33 minutes after Shkia. So from Shkia until 33 minutes after Shkia, if it's a real pressing circumstance, even until 40 minutes after Shkia, we could consider that the Ben Hashmashos period where we could apply this kula. The beauty of such an online share is that now you could hit the pause button, you could go back, you could even slow me down, and you could listen to it all over again. Okay, weiter in the Mishnah Berurah says the Chavetz Chaim. Vayin b'Magen Avram, take a look at the Magen Avram Shenistapek, who has a doubt, b'ben hashmashos shel motzei Shabbos. So we're talking now about ben hashmashos at the start of Shabbos, Friday evening going into Shabbos. And we're applying this kula. We're saying there are a lot of Isurei D'Rabbanan that you're allowed to perform during the ben hashmashos period, Shasat Chak, Tzarech Mitzvah. How about on the back end of Shabbos, when Shabbos is going out? That there's a ben hashmashos period, Safek Yom, Safek Laila on the back end of Shabbos too. Maybe it's already Motzei Shabbos. Could we apply the same kula on the back end? Says the Mishnah Berurah. First of all, Magen Avram has a doubt. He says the Efshir Dal Shulchan Aruch Ma'iri Rak Be'erev Shabbos. Maybe this only is true on Erev Shabbos, going into Shabbos. Why? Interesting lumdus. V'shani afuke yuma me'ayule yuma. Because there's a difference between the Kedusha of Shabbos coming in and the Kedusha of Shabbos going out. What's the difference? The Misveika loy paka Kedusha. Well, we could apply over here the theory of Chazaka. Going into Shabbos, right now everything is B'cheskas Heter. Right now there's no Isurim of Shabbos yet. Thursday, there's no Isurim of Shabbos. Friday morning, there's no Isurim on Shabbos. There's a point during the evening of Friday, going into Shabbos, where the Isurei Shabbos come in, right? But the Cheskas Heter is right now, everything is Beheter. So maybe on Erev Shabbos, we could be Mekel. And we could say, no, the Kedusha Shabbos didn't come in yet. The Isurim of Shabbos didn't activate yet. So at least when it comes to the Isurei D'Rabbanan, we could be Mekel. But on the back end of Shabbos, right now, Shabbos morning, Shabbos afternoon, early Shabbos evening, Isurei Shabbos are fully enacted. Whatever is Asr is Asr. It's B'cheskas Isser. Now you want to say misafik that the Isser went off? Now we should be making on Isurei D'Rabbanan and we should say, oh, it's Safek Laila, the Isser went off? No. It's much easier to say that the Isser didn't activate yet than to say that the Isser was here and the Isser already went off. So the Magen Avram says, a very powerful svara, that maybe we can't apply this kula on the back end of Shabbos. And the Chai Adam indeed is machmir and says, no, you can't apply this kula on Motzei Shabbos. The Bir Halacha brings down a base mayor that says, halacha l'maisa, no, there's no chiluk between ben hashmashos Erev Shabbos and ben hashmashos Motzei Shabbos. The same halacha applies. And yes, the Chai Adam says that an Issa D'Rabbanan l'tzarech mitzvah is mutter during ben hashmashos on the back end of Shabbos. The Chen bebrika Yosef kasav kei b'shem Rashba ksav yad de'erevin the shava ben hashmashos shal motzei Shabbos and ben hashmashos Erev Shabbos. When we come makayim l'maisa, nevertheless halach l'maisa kasav the Chai Adam writes the yesh lahachmir b'motzei Shabbos. Why? Mishum de'einanu b'kiyin b'zman ben hashmashos masei maschal hazman she'einanu v'ada yom v'ayin bir halacha. Because the Chai Adam at the end of the day says this question of exactly when does ben hashmashos start, it's too powerful, this suffix that we have. And therefore, since the Isurim, like the Magen Avram said, since it's not so easy, once the Isurim of Shabbos are activated, to say that they went off without knowing for sure, precisely, when ben hashmashos begins, halacha l'maisa, the Chai Adam was not willing to say that we should be mekel on Motzei Shabbos. Okay, now we have to go weiter in the Mechaber. And this requires just a little bit of background in the halachas of Eruei Tchumen that we already touched upon, but let me give it out to you in a little more detail. So we know that there's a halach of Tchum Shabbos. What's the halach of Tchum Shabbos? Very high level. At the beginning of Shabbos, what's called the beginning of Shabbos? Ben hashmashos. When Shabbos comes in during the Ben hashmashos period, wherever a person is, that is where he is kaineh shvisa. That's the halachic term. You acquire your living place for Shabbos, in the context of Hilchos Shabbos, you acquire your living area when Shabbos comes in during Ben hashmashos. If you live in a city, when Shabbos comes in, you're in the city, your mokum shvisa for Shabbos is the entire city. And you're allowed to travel throughout the city on Shabbos. You'd be allowed to walk wherever you want. Now, city is a loose term. I'm not talking about if you go to Borough Hall and you open the municipal maps and see where the city limits are. No, we're going to see in Chelik Dalet. This is much more complex. It depends. Did the houses end? Is there a river? So the term city I'm using loosely. But a habited city, houses close together, nothing that forms a halakhic interruption between parts of the city. You start off Shabbos in the city, your Makom Shvisa is the city. You could travel throughout the city. But once you get to the city limits, you're only allowed to go 2,000 amas outside of the city limits. That's your Tchum Shabbos. 2,000 amas beyond the city limits is the limit of your Tchum. You're not allowed to travel beyond that on Shabbos. What if you don't start Shabbos in a city? What if you're out in the wilderness and Shabbos comes in? Well, then your Makom Shvisa is your Dalet amas. You have 4 amas in each direction. And 2,000 amas beyond that. Your Makom Shvisa is your Dalet amas. And then you have Tchum going from out the end of your Makom Shvisa, the end of your Dalet amas, you have 2,000 amas in every direction. And that's going to be your Isser Tchum. Now, what if you have a need to go outside of your Tchum on Shabbos? You know that you have a friend Nebuch that's in the hospital. You want to be Mavaka Chayla. You know that there's a Dirshu share that you want to be able to go to on Shabbos that's outside of your Tchum. There's a method for you to be able to extend your Tchum. That method is a Ruvei Tchumen. How does a Ruvei Tchumen work? Again, high level. So you're in the city, and the Daf Yomi share is 3,500 amas beyond the city limits. You only have 2,000 amas outside your city limits. You got to go another 1,500 amas. So what do? You go to the 2,000 amma limit, and you set up Iruvei Tchumen. You take Mozain Shtei Seudais. You take an amount of food that could cover you for 2 Seudais on Shabbos, and you put it there at the end of your city limit. That now becomes your Makom Shvisa. Your Makom Shvisa during Ben Hashmashas, when Shabbos comes in, is now established as being over there. Since your Makom Shvisa is over there, you're still not affected in the city. You still have the entire city limits, but now you could go out of the city limits 2,000 amas to your Erev, and you could go another 2,000 amas beyond your Erev, because now your Makom Shvisa is where your Erev is. Okay, now, there's a technical requirement when it comes to your Erev. And that is, you put your Erev 2,000 amas outside the city limits. Now, maybe you put it there Friday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you went back home. And you're not going back to your Erev between now and Shabbos. When Ben Hashmashas comes, you're going to be at home in the city. Your Erev is going to be over there. But, technical requirement, theoretically, your Erev has to be accessible to you during Ben Hashmashas. Now, you're not going to use it because you're home. But if you would be there, you would have to be able to access your Erev. What do I mean you have to be able to access it? Well, let's do the math. Let's start from more complicated, from more chomer, and go to more kal. Let's say you set up your Erev Friday morning, 9 o'clock. It's Mozain Shtei Seudais. That means it's food. You're afraid that the animals are going to get to it. So you come up with a very good idea. I'll put the food in a box, and I'll bury it. I'll put the food in a nice box, I'll bury it 3 feet underground, and now the animals aren't going to get to it. Well, that Erev isn't going to work. You know why? Because during Ben Hashmashas, when Shabbos comes in, is your Erev accessible? No. You would have to do an Issa D'Oraisa to get to your Erev. You would have to take a shovel, dig a hole, and take out your Erev. That would be an Issa D'Oraisa. You're not allowed to do that. So your Erev is not accessible to you. Since your Erev is not accessible to you, because Hilchos Shabbos says you can't get to your Erev is not chal. Your Erev is not a good chal. Now that is a case where you would have to do an Issa D'Oraisa. How about if you would have to do an Issa D'Rabbanan? What would that case be? You took your Erev, and again, you wanted to protect it, so you put it up in a tree. Uh-oh, how is the Erev accessible? You're not allowed to take things off of a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to be mishtamish be'ilon on Shabbos. So now there's an Issa D'Rabbanan that's preventing you from accessing your Erev. So you would think, I guess the Erev is not chal, because during Ben Hashmashas, that's when the Erev activates. The Erev activates during the Ben Hashmashas period. Well, Hilchah Shabbos. I can't get the Erev because it's in a tree. Mishtamish be'ilan. But Siman Shin Mem Beis. Isurei D'Rabbanan are not in effect during the Bein HaShmoshes period if it's a Shas Chak or it's a Tzarech Mitzvah. Now, Iruvei Tchumen is generally considered Tzarech Mitzvah. Why? Because we're going to learn in Chelik Daled that really you're not allowed to do Iruvei Tchumen just for any frivolous reason. There has to be some aspect of a mitzvah why you need the Erev. So like I said, you want to be Mavaka Chayla. You want to go to a Daf Yomi Shir. So there's an aspect of a mitzvah. So when we look at Iruvei Tchumen, our assumption right away is that you set up the Erev for a mitzvah purpose. So now when Ben HaShmoshes comes in, your Erev is accessible to you. Because Mishtamish Be'ilan is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Isurei D'Rabbanan are not in effect during the Ben HaShmoshes period if it's a Shas Atchak or Tzarchei Mitzvah. So now your Erev is accessible to you. That's the halachas of Tchum that we need to know to understand what the Mechaber is going to say now. And by the way, the rest is easy sailing, so let's see if we can get through the page. Says the Mechaber, top line here on Kuf Tzad Gimel Amud Beis. Ketzad. So the Mechaber says, I'm telling you that Isurei D'Rabbanan don't go into effect during the Bein HaShmoshes period if it's a Shas Atchak or it's Tzarchei Mitzvah. Ketzad, what's a case? Says the Mechaber. Mutuloi ben hashmashos la'alois be'ilan. Theoretically, you would be allowed to climb a tree. It's a drabana mishtamish be'ilan. Loshut al panei hamayim, or to go swimming. It's a drabanan, right? Gzeira that you might make. I forgot what it's called. You might make a raft, right? I forgot the halachic term. I forgot it. Okay. Theoretically, you would be allowed to swim if it's for Tzarchei Mitzvah. What would be Tzarchei Mitzvah? Well, let's say this happened on Erev Rosh Hashanah or Erev Sukkot. So it's Erev Rosh Hashanah during the Ben HaShmoshes period. You need a shofar. The only way you could get the shofar is up in the tree. So you know you got to blow shofar tomorrow. It's Ben HaShmoshes Erev Rosh Hashanah. Where's my shofar? Oh no, my 10-year-old took my shofar and put it in the treehouse. And in order for me to get the shofar, I got to go climb the tree. Mishtamish be'ilan, Issa D'Rabbanan. Or it's Erev Sukkot. Where's my Daled Minim? Oh boy, I asked my son to make rings for my lulav. He took my lulav and esrog up to the treehouse. I got to go climb the tree in order to get my lulav and esrog. It's Ben HaShmoshes, Erev Sukkot, says the Mechaber. Beautiful case. Mutaloi Ben HaShmoshes. During Ben HaShmoshes, Erev Rosh Hashanah or Erev Sukkot, it's mutter, la'alois be'ilan, to go climb the tree. Loshut al panei hamayim. Or it's on a raft in the middle of the pool, and you got to go swim. You're allowed to go swim. Lahavi lulav a shofar, to get your lulav or a shofar. So we are relaxing the Yisad Rabbanan of Mishtamish Be'ilan, or swimming, L'tzarech Mitzvah, Ben HaShmoshes, going into Rosh Hashanah or going into Sukkot. V'chein, similarly, Moirid Meha Ilan, you could take down from the tree, a Moitzi Mea Carmelis, or you could transfer from a Carmelis, which is a Rishus Rabbanan, to a Rishus Harabim, Eruv Sha'asa. You made an Eruvei Tchumen Friday morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, but you put your Eruv up in the tree. It has to be accessible to you, theoretically, during the Ben HaShmoshes period. You put it up in a tree. How is it accessible to you? Mishtamish Be'ilan. Oh, yeah, but we relaxed the Yisad Rabbanan during Ben HaShmoshes, L'tzarech Mitzvah. Or, you went Friday morning, you set up your Eruv. Where did you put your Eruv? You put your Eruv in a Carmelis. You put your Eruv in a Carmelis. And your Mokum Shvisa happens to be, your Mokum Shvisa doesn't have to be exactly where the Eruv is. The Eruv could be here, your Mokum Shvisa could be a little bit away. So you put down the Eruv in a Carmelis. And now your Mokum Shvisa is in a Rishus Harabim. Well, that means that if you were in your Mokum Shvisa during the twilight period, you would have to take the Eruv from the Carmelis and bring it out to the Rishus Harabim, which is in a Sidrabanan, transferring from a Carmelis to a Rishus Harabim. Yeah, but it's okay. Why? Because it's only in a Sidrabanan. It's Tzarchei Mitzvah. For the Eruv, we relaxed the Sidrabanan. It's Ben HaShmoshes, and it's mutter. V'chein, similarly, let's just finish the Mechaber here. V'chein, similarly, Im hayatarod v'nechpaz ledavar shehu mishum shvus. If it's late on Erev Shabbos and you're getting everything ready for Shabbos and you're all panicked about something that's very important for Shabbos and you didn't get it done before Ben Hashmashos began, and now it's something that would take an Issa D'Rabbanan to get it done, mutter Ben Hashmashos, it would be mutter to do it during the Ben Hashmashos period. Umitam zen, for this reason, an example, mutter loymar Ben Hashmashos le'ini Yehudi l'hadlik lo'ner b'Shabbos. You would be allowed to do Amir La'akum, to ask an Eini Yehudi to light a ner, which is an Issa D'Oraisa, right? But you're doing Amir La'akum. You're doing Amir La'akum on a D'Oraisa. So it's a D'Rabbanan, it's a Shvus. You're allowed to do Amir La'akum on a D'Oraisa during Ben Hashmashos if it's something which is very, very urgent for Shabbos. So even with old-fashioned light bulbs with a filament, a good old-fashioned tungsten bulb that glows, which is an Issa D'Oraisa probably, to turn it on, you could ask an Eini Yehudi to turn on a light on Erev Shabbos during the Ben Hashmashos period. You forgot to leave on the light in the bathroom. You forgot to turn off the light in the bedroom. You could have an Eini Yehudi do this during the Ben Hashmashos period because it's a D'Rabbanan. It's very important for Shabbos. It's a big tzarich for Shabbos. So it's mutter during the Ben Hashmashos period. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Cotton Gimel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, v'chein moirid me'oyilan, v'choshev tzarich mitzvah. To allow you to use your Iruvei Tchumen is considered a tzarich mitzvah, af she'ein tzarich lo zeh ata kol kach b'Shabbos. Even if you don't need the food. In other words, if you needed the food, that would be a tzarich v'suda Shabbos. But even if you don't need the food of the Erev, you're home. You don't need the food of the Erev right now. But you need the Erev Tchumen to work, right? We're going to say that theoretically, your Erev is accessible to you, because we would allow you to go up the tree to get it during Ben Hashmashos. Mishum de'metchila in ma'arvin Iruvei Tchumen el l'dvar mitzvah, because you make it Erev Tchumen l'dvar mitzvah. V'miyah also lo hiridoi v'laviyah yatzloi lo yochel iruvai. And if we're going to say that, no, sorry, your Erev is no good, because if you would be over there, where your Erev is up in the tree, you wouldn't be allowed to get it. It's D'Rabbanan, then your Erev wouldn't work. V'hilkach tzarech mitzvah. The Mishnah Berurah wants to make sure that you understand the scenario here. When the Mechaber says that your Erev is in a Carmelis, and we're going to say that your Erev works because we're going to relax the Issa D'Rabbanan, exactly what does he mean? He doesn't mean that your Mokum Shvisa, he doesn't mean that the point of 2,000 Amas outside of your Tchum, you want to be kind of Mokum Shvisa over there. We don't mean that that's in a Carmelis, and you put your Erev in a Carmelis. For that, we wouldn't have to relax any Issa D'Rabbanan. If you were in the Carmelis during the Ben Hashmashos period where your Erev is, you're allowed to pick up your Erev and eat the food. You're in a Carmelis. What's the problem? You can't transport it more than Dalet Amos. But if you're standing next to it, you want to sit down, you want to eat, there's no problem. We don't need to relax any Yisur D'Rabbanan there. That's not the scenario. The scenario is what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say now. It's saying a loymar. V'hu iskaven liktoi shvisa b'rishus harabim oy b'rishus hayached asamach eitzel ha-Carmelis. You wanted to be kind of shvisa in your friend's backyard, which is fenced in and it's a rishus hayachid. But you put your Erev outside the fence in a Carmelis. Well, if you're in the Makom Shvisa in your friend's backyard in a Rishus HaYachid, and now you want to take the Erev from the Carmelis into the Rishus HaYachid, that's it, it's a D'Rabbanan. V'im lo yeh rashoy ben hashmashos shu zman chalois Erev l'hoitzi me'ha-Carmelis la'aviyah yatzlo lo yochel evura v'lechein shari. If we're going to say, your Erev is no good, because, what do you mean? It's an Issa D'Rabbanan to take the food and bring it into your friend's backyard. It's Issa D'Rabbanan. You're being moitzi from a Carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. You're not allowed to do that. Issa D'Rabbanan. So your Erev isn't Chal. No, it is Chal. Why? Because, again, it's an Issa D'Rabbanan during Ben Hashmashos, Tzarich Mitzvah. It would be Mutter. It's gotten hey. The Mechaber told us there's two cases where we apply this kula, a shasat chak or a tzarich mitzvah. Tzarich mitzvah, we explained. What's the shasat chak? if you're panicking over something that you need for Shabbos. If you take a look at the Shar Tzion, Ois Cotton Dalid, the Mishnah Berurah Kedarkai Bakodesh is doing very fancy footwork over here. I'll explain it to you quickly outside because it's late. What the Chavetz Chaim is saying is like this. The wording of the Mechaber is flowing out of the Rambam. The Rambam says that we could be Matir Isuri D'Rabbanan during Ben Hashmashos because of a Shasat Chak, a pressing circumstance. So what does the Mechaber mean when he says, what's a pressing circumstance? Im HaTorah oy nechpaz. You're panicking about something on Erev Shabbos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you know what it means? If you're all panicked about something, oy vey, it's the last minute, did the lights get turned, did this happen, did the air conditioning get set, and you find something that wasn't done, that now it's going to require an Issa D'Rabbanan to get it done, well, why are you all worked up and agitated about it? Must be, it's a Shasat Chak. So when the Mechaber says, Im HaTorah v'nechbaz l'davar, he means that's the raya that it's a Shasat Chak. The raya that it's a Shasat Chak is, you're all agitated. So you're all agitated, so it's a Shasat Chak. Now, there are others, if you take a look at the Shar Tzion Dalid, that say, it's not, we don't have to use Tarid or Nechbaz to turn it into a Shasat Chak. What the Mechaber means is, if you're Tarid v'nechbaz, so it's something that's going to ruin your Shabbos. In other words, if you realize at the last minute that the air conditioning wasn't set properly and it's going to be 99 degrees and humid outside, it's going to ruin your Shabbos. So it's a tzorich of Einik Shabbos. That's why you're all agitated. That's also enough to be matir on Issa D'Rabbanan during Ben Hashmashos. We already discussed this halacha, by the way, earlier in Siman Reish Samach Aleph. V'ayin b'bi'ar gras Siman Reish Samach Aleph shemash b'minei shemash mater Rambam b'minei shu tarid v'nechbaz hainu kishu shasat chag gadol. Kigoy sheroitza la'arev b'minei shu tarid v'nechbaz l'vrayach b'minei kuti bazeh shebazeh shava ha'inyin l'dvar mitzvah v'yitir yishvos ben hashmashos tahainu afilu kishe'erev munach ala ilona b'kamelis. What the Gra says is, the Gra makes this a little more chomer. The Gra says that when the Rambam says that something is a Shasat Chak, he means a real Shasat Chak. He means somebody has to set up an Iruvei Trumin because there are Chas v'Chalila, Eino Yehudi marauders coming into town that might present a sakana to you and you have to run away. And that's why you want to set up an Iruvei Trumin. That's a real Shasat Chak. Ois Cotton Vav and Echbaz, Ein Mashik Asavdu, B'Simin Reish Samach Aleph, B'Mishnah Berurah, Cotton Tezayin, B'Shem Marshal. The Marshal, if you take a look back over there, and it's kedai to look over there, in Siman Reish Samach Aleph, B'Mishnah Berurah, Cotton Tezayin, it's kedai to look over there. Over there, the Marshal, over there, the Mishnah Berurah brought down a Marshal. And the Marshal says anything that didn't get done on Erev Shabbos, if it's something that's going to cause you tsar on Shabbos, but as long as it's a Shabbos-tika thing, like the example I gave you, you're going to be mitzvah on Shabbos because the air conditioning wasn't set. That's something that if it's going to take an Issa D'Rabbanan to rectify the situation, you could use an Issa D'Rabbanan like a Mir La'akum to rectify the situation. But if it's something that takes an Issa D'Rabbanan to rectify the situation, and if you don't do it, you're going to be mitzvah on Shabbos, but it has nothing to do with Shabbos, it has something to do with next week, Wednesday, that we are not going to be matir. Oiskat Zayin. Ner b'Shabbos, the Mechaber said that based on this halacha that we're matir to have an Eini Yehudi light a ner on Shabbos. Hai b'Shabbos v'tzayin aloymar sheyadlik tekef ben hashmashos v'tzar Shabbos. When the Mechaber says we could be matir to do Amir la'akum to have an Eini Yehudi light a ner, he means that you're going to ask the Eini Yehudi to light the ner during Bein Hashmashos. Not that you're going to do Amir La'akum Bein Hashmashos and have the Eini Yehudi light the ner on Shabbos. No, then that's Amir La'akum on a Daraisa. It has to be Amir La'akum on a Darabanan. Avalam Mavakshe Shiyadlik Achakak B'Shabbos Gufa Ze Osir Afilu in Bikshay B'Ba Yom V'Chamavur Le'el B'Simin Shin Zayin Sev Beis. V'Lav Dakvil Tzar Suda Mater HaMechaber Du Adin Mavakshe Shiyadlik B'Cheder Shiyotchet Sham Gam Ken Yesh Lahakal. Doesn't have to be that the ner is going to be used for the Suda Shabbos. It could even be that the ner is going to be used in a bedroom or in a base of kisei or anything like that. Okay, we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time with Siman Shin Mem Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This list of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send you Yeshua's Refuas Parnasa Shaduchim to those in need. We should be Zaychet to see the Bias Gael Tzedek, the Meher of Yameinu Amen. Be well.